Again, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our final Future Made in Australia Innovation Fund webinar. My name is Lauren Vincent, and I am Investment and Program Director here at ARENA. For those of you who may have joined one of the earlier sessions that we had on renewable energy technology manufacturing or our low carbon liquid fuels session this morning, just to let you know that the beginning content will be the same and is the same across all three webinars, with the back half, about half an hour in, will be specific to this focus area. So firstly, I want to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which we are all gathering here today, and I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. Here at ARENA, we acknowledge the continual connection that our projects have across this country, both across Australia and the Torres Strait Islands, and we recognise the important contributions that our projects make to ensuring ongoing sustainability here in Australia. So next slide, please. So this is just a brief agenda of what we're going to be covering today. So I'm going to give a short introduction to ARENA, run through the particulars of the Innovation Fund program, our assessment process. We'll then cover both eligibility and merit criteria, and then we'll go through the specific aspects of the green metals focus area and leave some time at the end for Q&A. Next slide. So for those of you who don't know, ARENA is the Australian Renewable Energy Agency. We were established back in 2012, and our purpose is to support the global transition to net zero emissions, and we do that through the provision of grant funding in order to accelerate the pace of pre-commercial innovation to the benefit of all Australians. Next slide. So this is a bit of a snapshot of the work that we've done in the little over a decade that we've been operating. So we've invested a bit over $3 billion across more than 800 projects. We've made investments in every state and territory around Australia across a broad range of technology types. And so the technologies that you can see here on screen are both historical investments as well as technologies that are aligned to our current priorities. And we invest across the innovation chain from studies through R&D, early stage demonstrations through to later stage pre-commercial deployments as well. Next slide, please. So now I'm going to move into the particulars of the program. So some of you may be aware of the current government's broader Future Made in Australia agenda, which was a total $22.7 billion package that was announced back in 2024. And so the Future Made in Australia Innovation Fund is one pillar within that broader package. So across the Future Made in Australia agenda, we're really focusing on attracting and enabling secure and resilient investment across Australia, across various areas, including in renewable energy technologies, in order to make Australia a renewable energy superpower. We're really focused on bringing Australian ideas to life, focusing on enhancing Australian innovation and investing in people and places. And so there are a number of priorities in the Future Made in Australia landscape, three of which are being investigated in the Innovation Fund, these being green metals, low carbon liquid fuels, and renewable energy tech manufacturing. And so the Future Made in Australia Innovation Fund in and of itself has $1.5 billion in grant funding available, and that's to support pre-commercial innovation and deployment of technologies that are linked to our focus areas. Next slide, please. So specific to the program, these are the outcomes, the very high-level outcomes that we've implemented across the Future Made in Australia Innovation Fund. And you'll see these then reflected again in the specific focus area documents in a far more tangible way. But at a high level, what we're looking to do is to increase the uptake of technologies aligned to the focus areas through both innovation and commercialisation activities. We're looking to improve Australia's capability and capacity to either produce or manufacture the various technologies, to support stronger supply chains, because we recognise the value that that provides in terms of the commercialisation pathway, and as is common in a number of ARENA programs, improving knowledge, skills and workforce participation. So the overall objective of the fund is really grounded on ensuring that we're supporting and funding innovative projects that can help Australia to transition to a net zero future. Next slide, thanks. So these are the three streams that you can seek funding through the Innovation Fund. So as I said, it's a total of $1.5 billion available. So we've got the low carbon liquid fuels stream that has $250 million available, and we ran an information session on that stream this morning, with that content being made available in the coming days. We've got the renewable energy tech manufacturing stream that has an initial tranche of $200 million available, and we will, with The total allocation there is $500 million, and there'll be more information coming as to how that remaining $300 million will be spent. But that's prioritising priority technologies here, which are shown as energy storage, thermal energy storage, transport, so that's focused on zero emissions vehicles infrastructure, green hydrogen infrastructure, and other technologies such as transmission and distribution associated technologies. But really the focus here today is on the green metal streams, which has a total allocation, which is the largest of all the three, of $750 million. And we'll be going into a little bit more detail as to the specifics later on in the presentation. Next slide, thanks. So it's important for us to recognise the collaborative effort that has taken to get us to this point. So we have been working through the design process with our colleagues over at DQ, DISA and Ditrica across the various streams. And so in the green metal space, that has been most closely working alongside our colleagues at DISA in the industry portfolio. And so we really do thank them for their efforts and look forward to that relationship ongoing. But the specifics of the way that we have structured this program, we've introduced a new kind of concept, which is called this kind of stream-based funding model, where we have both an innovation and deployment stream. And I'll go into more detail on that on the next slide. As I've mentioned, projects need to be aligned to one of the three focus areas, being green metals, low carbon liquid fuels, or RE tech manufacturing. This program has been designed to be open and collaborative, which means that you are required to connect with one of the members of our investments team in order to discuss your concept. We can provide you with advice and support in terms of preparing an application. And what we ask is that you then get endorsement from our team in order to submit that application. And the reason behind that, I guess, concept endorsement requirement is really to ensure that your application is right-sized and right fit for the program, pretty quickly to a yes or a no in terms of those next steps. And we find that that's a far better way to minimize sort of wasted effort and make sure that your application is aligned to what we need. We can also provide you further advice and guidance as to whether your proposal might be better suited to an alternative funding program that we have available, of which there are many. We recognize there's quite a lot of alignment between various ARENA programs. So we're really there to provide that advice and support. So this program, unlike some of our others, supports, as I said, quite a broad range of technology types and activities from TRL 3 to 9, as well as studies. And in most cases, we are expecting matched funding. Next slide, thanks. So as I said, we've introduced this concept of the two streams being an innovation and deployment stream. And really the intent behind this is really informed by many of the other programs that we've delivered over the past decade, where we recognise that projects, depending where they are in the innovation chain, there is a very different risk profile in terms of the way that we should be assessing and making investment decisions. And so what we're trying to do is ensure that there's, as best we can, an accelerated pathway from those earlier stage projects, whilst also giving us the flexibility to do the additional diligence that we need to for those later stage projects. So important to note that the difference between the two streams is not a sort of financial threshold. Because of the variance between green metals, renewable tech manufacturing, and low carbon liquid fuels, we didn't think that there was an appropriate dollar threshold to suggest in terms of grant funding whether you would come through the innovation stream or the deployment stream. So we haven't put any dollar threshold there, but the two streams apply against all three focus areas. So the key differences there is if you're coming through the innovation stream, and our team can certainly provide advice as to which fit is best for you, you'd be looking at sort of an earlier stage project, likely to be sort of a pre-commercial demo or pilot. And this would also include things like feasibility and feed studies. And we would expect the project to be unlikely to be generating significant revenue, if at all, versus those coming through the deployment stream, where we would expect those to be a scale up, a step up in terms of that kind of larger scale deployment, something that might have been proven previously on a smaller scale. And we would generally expect those projects to be earning some revenue, although we recognise that the projects wouldn't be successful without grant support. And as I said, that's really all about trying to balance our assessment process to be best fit for the kinds of projects that we're seeing coming through. Next slide, sorry. So important to note that the Future Made in Australia Innovation Fund is captured under the Future Made in Australia Act, and it is designated as what is called FMA support under the Act. So we are legislated and required under that Act to have regard to the community benefit principles when making funding decisions. And so this means that for certain projects, there will be additional requirements to create, for example, a Future Made in Australia plan that will outline how that project will deliver that community benefit. So our team is there to provide that guidance and support as we expect the delivery and adherence to community benefit principles to be proportionate to the kind of project that you're delivering. And so what this means is that we don't expect, for example, a feasibility study or an R&D project to be able to deliver the same benefits as a larger scale deployment. But the requirements under the Act is that anyone who produces an FMA plan, it must be in writing, and it has to outline what the project is going to do against the CBPs. And just important to note that Minister can create additional rules, and if this were to occur, then we would provide that additional information through our website as well as through the endorsement process. Next slide, thanks. So here's a list of the principles themselves as outlined in the Act. These are also listed in the Future Made in Australia Innovation Fund guidelines. I'm not going to go through each of these in detail. Please read these at your own leisure when you have a chance. At this stage, as I said, we are here to provide some advice and support as to how you might interpret some of these, as we recognise that there's a variance across the sort of landscape as how these can be interpreted. But next slide, thanks. We have pulled together some resources to be able to help you in terms of understanding how you may apply benefit within your project. Important to note that DISA have been carrying out consultation throughout January regarding the CBPs. And so we will be keeping a close eye on that and be able to share the results and further information when it's available. However, as it stands today, we're fairly agnostic as to how applicants might consider the CBPs. And so some of the things that we've included as optional for you to consider might be presenting us with relevant business policies or workplace agreements. You may have benefit sharing agreements in place with impacted communities. You might have a procurement plan that demonstrates how you're going to prioritise, for example, local supply chains or local suppliers. You might have resourcing plans that outline how you're going to attract a diversified workforce. You might have L&D opportunities, targets, things like that. So there's a whole range of different activities that you can consider in designing your project. Next slide. So quickly, I'm going to run through our assessment process. So this is ARENA's assessment process largely on a page. As I said, the first stage in terms of applying is submitting an initial concept to us. So you can do that through a link on our website, which is through our project proposal, a funding advice form. And through that form, we just ask a series of questions. And what that enables us to do is to connect you appropriately with the right team within ARENA who can provide support and help you navigate our process more effectively. If given the thumbs up in terms of your concept, so we think it's well aligned, then we would likely require you to submit an EOI. For applicants that are coming through the innovation stream, there may be an opportunity to skip that EOI process and proceed straight to full application, but the team will be able to provide you with advice and support on that. So subject to your applications being considered of high merit, we would then put the project forward for ultimate funding approval. Any project seeking over $50 million would need approval from the Minister. Otherwise, that funding approval would be done through ARENA's board or CEO or the like. And then following approval, we would then look to execute a contract with you, and you will find 2 template funding agreements on our website. One that's shorter form, that's more aligned to the innovation stream, and another that's longer form, that's more aligned to the deployment stream. And again, our team can provide advice as to which template would be best suited for your project. But all in all, here's some appropriate timeframes as to how long we expect the process to last. There are a number of variables within that, really dependent on, I guess, your ability to answer questions and move through the process and address any feedback. Next slide. Excuse me. So next we're going to move on to the eligibility criteria. So we've simplified the criteria on this program compared to others that we've delivered. So here they are on a snapshot, one slide, sorry. Eligible applicant, we've got eligible project, how you have access to IP and some compliance requirements. So I'll run through those now. Thanks, Bill. So firstly, we've got eligible applicant. So under this program, all applicants must hold a valid ABN and then fit one of the following categories. So that's either being an Australian company, being a state or territory corporate, a local government or an organisation that's purpose with representing a local council, or be a research institution, so including Australian unis or CRCs or alternative institutions. Next slide, thanks. We also, in terms of the actual project itself, these are fairly high level. All we require is that the activities primarily take place in Australia and that the technology is ideally at TRL3 or above and is a technology that ARENA is legally able to fund. And we can provide some advice and direction as to the definitions of these. We do take a fairly broad consideration in terms of renewable energy, which includes enabling technologies as well. Next slide, thanks. We do require that you have appropriate ownership or access to any IP that you may need to use for the project. And then we ask that you comply with some various legislation, including Workplace Gender Equality Act, that you're not listed as a terrorist or have any intention or be a member of the National Redress Scheme. And these are fairly standard requirements if you would across sort of many government grants as well. And then we do have some other compliance requirements. These are not purely eligibility requirements, but important to note because these will be factored in the funding agreement. So things like aligning with the Modern Slavery Act, and also being aware that we may request information regarding past or future climate performance as well. So next slide, and I think at that point, I'll hand over to you, Will.
Awesome. Thanks, Lauren. Hi, everyone. My name is Will Reeves, and I'm an investment manager in the heavy industry team here at ARENA. And so I'm going to take you through our overall merit criteria for the assessment of projects and then onto the actual description of the green metals focus area documents themselves. And so broadly speaking, if Lauren has just referred to the eligibility criteria, we can consider those requirements to get your foot in the door for an ARENA project. And then these merit criteria speak to the overall quality and assessment of that project itself. If anyone has had engagement with ARENA previously, these should be quite familiar, and similar standard and 5 merit criteria approach is quite consistent across our programs. So moving to merit criterion A, this is related to the contribution to the technology focus area objectives and outcomes. And so the key piece here is around alignment to those objectives and outcomes. That can be demonstrated through how the project would advance any goals, targets, and metrics that are outlined in the technology focus area, such as jobs creation, emission reduction, or other elements within that. And then equally the pathway or progress of the technology around the innovation potential or commercialization pathway. Manufacturing opportunity is probably more relevant to our renewable energy technology manufacturing stream. As Lauren's previously alluded to as well, any project will have to have consideration of the community benefit principles. And I think the key thing I'd like to call out here is that projects will be assessed on a sliding scale with respect to the community benefit principles. So there are no hard metrics, and understand that an R&D style project or a study would have different requirements, but also community benefit principle potential. And so, yeah, we would seek to have a bit of a pragmatic approach in how that's applied. Merit criterion B is related to the applicant capability and capacity. And so that is the actual who will be executing on the project. And this can be considered from capability, so that experience, expertise, showing a strong track record in delivering outcomes from similar activities on time and on budget, and as well as any relevant accreditation standards and benchmarks that might be relevant in this project. Capacity then speaks to having the appropriate resources available to execute on that project. And we consider that from personnel, equipment, plant, or facilities. And I think important to call out here that where there are resource gaps identified, the pathway to addressing those and making sure that's been considered. And if there's an overall project consortium, the nature of the agreements between those project partners. And again, an assessment of the capability and capacity with regard to being able to execute and deliver on those activities related to the community benefit principles. Merit criterion C is related to the actual schedules, timelines, project design of the project scope to be executed on, and so how well the project integrates with the technology focus areas. And I would consider this from, as we said, design, scheduling, a consideration of risk, and I think important here, that's approach to identifying, managing, reporting personnel, delivery, technical and financial risks. And where those risks have been identified, we'd expect to see appropriate risk mitigation strategies as methods to address those. Here, there's also consideration of risk of negotiating and executing a funding agreement with ARENA. So I'd encourage all applicants to review the standard legal T's and C's that are available in the ARENA template funding agreement that's available on our website. There's also consideration of compliance with other requirements that are set out in the program guidelines themselves. And I think, yeah, it's important to bear in mind that this webinar, as well as the technology focus areas and the guidelines, should all be read and considered in conjunction with one another. On this slide, we're calling out that by nature of the innovation versus the deployment stream, we're expecting that we'll see a broad range of projects from, that early R&D style to potentially larger commercial deployment projects. And so expecting to see a varying level of rigor and definition within the project scope itself. And that will also speak to the procurement of the equipment supply and sources from those key components, and also the elements of the Future Made in Australia plan, and there would be different expectations placed upon different projects, and that's where I would highly encourage you to work with your ARENA representative to work out the expectations for your specific project. Merit criterion D is related to the financial viability and co-funding commitment. And so key consideration with this criterion is what would happen if ARENA funding was not sought, or what is the key catalyst or unlock that ARENA funding provides to your project, and assessing whether this project is commercially viable without ARENA funding. Within this, we'd expect to see a detailed project budget and the quality and completeness of that project budget, with being able to show merit by providing evidence such as quotes or any other substantiating evidence that will show the accuracy or completeness of the budget that has been provided. And within here, there's also the level of financial co-contributions being provided, whether that's cash or in kind, and that helps applicants be able to demonstrate that they've got sufficient skin in the game to be wanting to see their project to succeed. On the accuracy and economics, this is where we're starting to consider elements such as a dynamic project and financial model, and within that, the ability to sensitize key variables with project returns. So key elements there being the IRR and NPV, and this kind of works together to be able to demonstrate that need for ARENA funding, hence potentially not being commercially viable without that funding. Finally, merit criterion E is related to knowledge sharing, and so that's ARENA's key return on investments through the provision of the grant funding, and so that speaks to the value of the knowledge that is generated by the project and how this will contribute to the outcomes contained within the technology focus areas. We would expect to see a knowledge sharing plan, and as well as consideration of an appropriate allocation of resources to deliver those knowledge sharing outcomes, as well as how data, information and lessons learned will be collected, and how we can ensure that this reaches the appropriate target audiences. And within that, that's also consideration of any constraints that might prevent the sharing and knowledge of information itself. So that brings the overall program overview section to a close. So I'll now move on to a discussion of the specific green metals focus areas before moving on to key dates and Q&A. So the green metals program, to start off with, the key outcomes that we're hoping to achieve through this is considered from 4 key elements that are listed on the slide here. And that would be to evaluate and demonstrate innovation in iron and steel making processes, technologies and equipment for green iron and steel making in Australia, research, demonstrate and scale the use of Australian iron ores in green iron and steel making, and support the trial, demonstration and scale up of technologies that enable green alumina and aluminium production in Australia, and accelerate or enable final investment decision on commercial scale green metals productions in Australia. And so I'll just call out that we consider the aluminium and the iron and steel value chains as high impact, hard to abate sectors of the Australian economy, accounting for almost up to 11% of domestic emissions. So we think that this is the key sectors within our green metals industry that we're hoping to target. And I think these outcomes also speak to the broad range from the R&D to the commercial deployment projects we are able to fund through the program itself. So how these outcomes were informed is at the beginning of, or first half of 2025, ARENA undertook a period of targeted consultation with key stakeholders. We received 34 registers of interest and undertook a very targeted consultation approach, leveraging some already strong relationships that we're lucky to hold within the industry itself. Note that the kind of key stakeholders that we list on the page there are by no means exhaustive, but I think important to illustrate the type of entities that we might expect to apply through the program itself. Consultation topics ranged across a broad range of mechanisms, and I think key here was making sure we're able to design a program that is fit for purpose and addressing those key pain points that were being observed in the market. And so as a quick overview, really heard a need for upfront capex as opposed to production credits, and helping to address the internal IRR hurdle rates, project financial metrics, as well as the collaborative nature of the ARENA process. So you'll note, as Lauren alluded to, the Innovation Fund is an open program rather than some other closed programs that we have provided in the past. And then finally, I'll just touch on the community benefit principles. So as we said, not expecting hard metrics to be applied through this, and very much a sliding scale, and that would be formed up in conjunction with your ARENA representative, who you could reach out to through the funding advice page that Lauren has previously alluded to. So from this consultation, we then were able to kind of consider the key features of the program that we did want to incorporate for the $750 million. So the funding model, expecting a matched funding model, which would, as anyone is familiar with the ARENA's ARP style program, it's generally up to a 50% of project capital cost funding, and through CapEx support. On the minimum grant ask, we have a $1 million minimum grant ask, and that's just to reflect the nature of the style of projects that we expect, being a little bit more advanced in what they're hoping to create, and also making sure it's an appropriate allocation of resources on applicants to go through the ARENA process itself. And then I'll touch on the project type. So ARENA funding will be available across from feed to deployment. So as I've touched on already, just being able to fund a very broad range of projects, and we hope that we'll be able to catalyze across various elements of both the aluminium and iron and steel value chains. So from this, we were able to establish two key focus areas. Focus area 1, supporting first-of-a-kind solutions development in green metals, and focus area 2, accelerating commercial scale green metals production. Broadly speaking, these are then aimed to support the development of low emission technologies to unlock green metals production in Australia. And so the way to think about this is focus area 1, I think we might see slightly smaller innovation R&D style focused projects, whereas focus area 2, we might see more mature or previously deployed at a smaller scale projects that are then hoping to reach FID on a larger or potentially even commercial scale style facility itself. But I can move into more detail on focus area 1. So as I alluded to, this is really encouraging the R&D and concepts for testing and scale up, but also novel technology demonstrations, particularly obviously in a green metals use case. So expecting to see a lot of first of a kind demonstrations, operational trials. I'll call out here that any R&D trials, or we note that within universities or R&D organizations are eligible for funding, they will need to have a direct green metals industry application, and we would expect an industry partner to be part of that overall project consortium to help demonstrate the green metals application. Other potential applicants could be emission reduction technology OEMs, as well as established alumina, aluminium, iron and steel value chain entities, and also startups with commercialization potential in green metals production. And obviously there can be project consortium that comprise each member of those, and again would be working with your ARENA representative to help understand the most appropriate way to structure a potential project. Focus area 2, so focus area 1 is smaller projects, R&D focus, whereas in focus area 2 it's all about commercial scale applications of green metals technology that are yet to be fully verified. So expect to see deployment of mature technologies, first of a kind green metals use case, but also accelerating FID on large-scale deployment and scale-up of technologies that enable green metals production. So I think within that, we might see that it's been, tested, or there's been a first of a kind, second of a kind style demonstration, but there's still a key commercial gap in getting to that larger scale facility. And so we're hoping this focus area offers to be quite catalytic in that funding. Within this, we would expect projects with a strong commercial interest, or at least a pathway to sustainable offtake and large-scale demonstration and deployment of low-emission technologies. You'll note on the right there, we've got some examples of low-emission technologies, many of which ARENA has funded. Small-scale pilots or demonstrations of already. We'll call out that by no means consider this list exhaustive. It's just on the back of what came out through our consultation process. In terms of applicants, you'll note here that we've removed the R&D or university style applicants, as we don't think it's aligned with the type of projects that we will expect, but would still be aluminium, alumina, iron and steel value chain entities, emission reduction OEMs, and particularly here will be a focus on the commercialization pathway, which then speaks to the offtake that I referred to earlier. And again, consortia where market collaboration will generate outsized knowledge sharing outcomes and information dissemination. Question can arise around what does a knowledge sharing consortia look like, and the key piece here is just ensuring that there is a knowledge sharing agent or the appropriate capacity and capability to ensure that if there is a large scale ARENA grant being provided, that there'll be an appropriate knowledge sharing value generated through that, and ensuring that that knowledge can reach the broadest audience possible. So that brings the overview of the focus areas themselves to a close. Touching on some key dates before we move into Q&A. The Innovation Fund was officially launched in December 2025 with applications open as of 17 December 2025. So if you are interested in potential funding opportunities or think that you have an eligible project, highly encourage you to review the key documents and then reach out through the funding advice website that Lauren has previously alluded to, noting that you will need ARENA endorsement prior to submission of any EOI itself. I'll now move into the Q&A section, and I will invite my colleagues Lauren to come back, but also introduce my colleagues Jody Hurley and Arnie Ramesh from our heavy industry team. You should be able to note the Q&A mechanism in the top banner of the webinar itself. So if you would like to post or publish any questions in there, and we can start to try and make our way through them. I will note that due to the size of the forum, hard to get into any super project specifics, but we will take all questions on notice, and if it's appropriate to update our FAQ document, we most definitely will do that. So taking a look through, and thank you, Tanya, for publishing the information session as well.
So we've had one come through around focus areas, whether the focus areas under this, it's confusing because we've got focus areas under focus areas, but whether there are specific TRL requirements under the two focus areas. And as they are drafted, no, we haven't sort of necessarily specified specific TRL levels across the two focus areas under this stream. However, do keep in mind, of course, the general intent behind them. So when we're talking about sort of more mature technologies, then that, should be a guide as to where you would expect that technology to be sitting on the TRL scale. And of course, the fact that the program is starting at TRL 3. So that would be the other indicator in terms of where you might be able to fit. But I would always recommend that if you have, technology that you're interested in seeking funding for, that you come and talk to us and get some advice, and we can give you some guidance as to where that project might fit in terms of which stream is best placed.
Awesome. Thanks, Lauren. I will answer a question related to, for Focus Area 2, is there an expectation whether the lead applicant should be an established Australian company for years of establishment, or can an SPV be considered? So ARENA has a strong history of funding project SPVs, but I think it's just ensuring that there's the appropriate backing, or that it's related entity, parent company, etc., has the resources required. And so that's quite a detailed structuring question that your ARENA representative would be able to assist you through understanding. But at a high level, ARENA has funded SPVs as required in the past, and kind of speaks to just the requirements of broader project structuring. Lauren, perhaps a question around, can you clarify the co-funding requirement? Is there a minimum cash contribution from applicants?
Yeah, so in short, no, there's no minimum cash contribution requirement. So the co-funding could be cash or it could be in kind. However, we do tend to consider cash to be typically of higher merit. And of course, that's going to be proportionate to the project that you're proposing. So, we would see that co-funding commitment to be, again, on a sliding scale. So an earlier stage project, then we may, look to fund up to 50% of external costs. If it was, say, for example, a study, then that would sort of shift as you move through, particularly getting into the larger deployment, where we may expect to see, for something that's a little bit more mature, a higher co-contribution. But typically under, this is a sort of general rule of thumb across all ARENA programs, we can consider in kind, but we do put great emphasis on cash.
Awesome. Thanks, Lauren. Question around other metals being considered. I might take a first pass, but Jody, keen for you to add anything in. So we have identified the aluminium and iron and steel value chains as hard to abate, high impact focus areas, I guess, for the fund itself. So not intending to fund other metal emission reduction. However, we'll note that ARENA has other programs that are focused on, for example, critical energy minerals and other decarbonisation opportunities through that. Jody, did you have anything to add within that?
No, nothing further to add. I think, as Lauren said, always reach out to our team before you submit any application, and we can kind of talk you through whether it's aligned with this program or might be a better fit with one of our other programs.
Awesome. Thank you. Lauren, perhaps a question for you. Is an overseas industrial partner eligible to participate in this funding program?
Yes, in short. So we don't have any kind of restrictions when it comes to partners. So the eligibility requirements only apply to the actual applicant themselves. So certainly international partners are very, within part of a broader consortia, are very welcome to participate and contribute to the project. Obviously, we have the requirement for the majority of the work to take place in Australia. What we're really looking for is, in terms of partners, is their capability and what they're adding into the project in terms of that skill base. So we don't necessarily have any restrictions. You're welcome to partner with internationals, and that's something that we would probably expect in this space as well.
Awesome. Thank you. When some question come through, when does the program close? Is there a first day and last day on which you accept applications? So unlike other ARENA closed funding programs, this is an open funding program where applications are open as of 17th of December 2025. Funding will remain open until the allocation has been exhausted, but highly encourage you to reach out to the ARENA team who can help you through the application process and note the endorsement requirement prior to the submission of an EOI as well.
So I might jump in
Lauren,
for the next one.
Please.
No, not that was perfect answer. All good. No, but I might. We've just got a double question kind of come through.
Sure.
That's tied to the renewable energy tech manufacturing webinar that we ran yesterday. And so, yes, that does include an opportunity for us to support renewable hydrogen technologies. So bit of a different scope there. We recognise the tie between hydrogen and green metals. I think the crux of the question, though, is can you apply through sort of both focus areas? In short, no. So if you've got the one project and there is a hydrogen link, but it's kind of primarily a green metals project, then we would provide the advice to come through this focus area in terms of assessment. If, for example, though, you were, doing a project that was looking at manufacturing specific hydrogen technology, might be, componentry or what have you for storage, for example, then we would provide the advice to go through that stream. But certainly that's what our team is here to give you that kind of structure around. But typically you would not seek funding through multiple ARENA programs. We would just provide you the advice of where you're best fit to go through. And then the second part of that question is around co-funding expectations and whether this is across all levels of government or just through this grant. Not entirely sure exactly what you mean by the question, but I'm going to take it as an assumption of, will we consider multiple government kind of contributions into the one project? And does that still apply with the co-funding requirement? And so again, this is a common rule that we apply across all ARENA funding, particularly at state and federal level. We consider any government grant to be, grant funding, government grant funding, and therefore the co-contribution requirement applies regardless of where that government grant funding is coming from, because essentially, it is all coming from the taxpayer. So when we would consider that matched funding requirement, if you had a 25% grant from ARENA and a 25% grant from another government organisation, say a state-based organisation, then we would consider that to be 50% government grant funding. So you couldn't match the ARENA grant at 50% if it was with an alternative government grant in order to get you to the full project cost. So we do kind of consider all government grant funding as one and the same.
Awesome. Thanks, Lauren. I'll answer, what level of detail do we need to engage in the initial consultation stage beyond the concept? So very, very high level, we would probably expect around 3 to 5 slides that just contain the key elements of the project. So that would be around project scope, timeline, partners, and budget, and consideration of knowledge sharing outcomes. I think the key call out here is that the level of detail and refinement within the project scope is expected to increase as you proceed through the ARENA process. So understanding that the EOI by nature of it, expression of interest, is more high level, while there is a exact budget and ARENA grant request that is required rather than a range, that initial concept is quite high level, and then your ARENA team and representative would work with you through that process. Perhaps Jody or Arnie, a question around the wording in the alumina and aluminium technology focus area versus green iron suggests higher TRL (brackets less research focus. Could you please elaborate?
Maybe I can quickly jump in, and Jody, if you want to add, you can. So look, I think for the iron and steel projects, it's aligned with the program guidelines in terms of TRL3 and above. So we can consider kind of those R&D projects as long as kind of you have a industry partner involved in the project, and that R&D project is enabling green iron and steel production in some way and has a strong pathway to commercialization.
And then it's the same for alumina and aluminium. So it's the same concept applies. So TRL3 and above just need to be able to be showing that it's contributing towards green alumina or green aluminium production. So I don't think that the intention was that they were different.
Awesome. Thank you. I think I accidentally archived it, but there was a question around international companies and whether they will be eligible for funding. So that international company could 100% be part of a broader consortium, but we'll note that as per Lauren's eligibility requirement B, the project activities will have to take place in Australia. And I think within this, we would definitely want to see at least an interest or some form of engagement from that overseas entity in establishing a presence within the Australian market. Question, could you clarify on the co-funding, if NRF provides equity/debt funding, is that counted as matched funding?
So I think that's building onto the answer I provided earlier around kind of considering all government grants. So just to clarify, if it's a government grant, so not equity or debt, then we consider all government grants to be kind of one and the same and go towards your sort of grant funding contribution. If the funding is coming from a government source, but it's equity or debt, then we do consider that differently, because obviously that's a very different kind of consideration in terms of the project revenue streams, etc. So if it's equity or debt, no. If it's coming from a government source, we recognise that you might get more favourable terms and to consider that, but no, we don't necessarily consider that the same as a grant.
Thanks, Lauren. Just looking through, and we'll note, there's co-funding usually follows successful grant funding. How do you manage this chicken and egg scenario? Might be another one for you, Lauren.
Sorry, coming off. So I think what the question is really trying to suggest is that it's through the actually receiving the grant funding from ARENA, for example, having that offer letter, that may be a way in which you could attract additional co-funding. And so we do recognise that there are instances, for example, where we might have to go first in giving you that conditional offer. And so that's typically what it would look like. We'd give you an offer of funding, but that would be conditional on you being able to raise additional funds. And if you were unsuccessful in raising that additional funding, then the projects would be unlikely to succeed. So that could be an offer letter. It might be that we sign a funding agreement with conditions in place, conditions precedent in place. There's many ways that we can manage that. And so if you've got that specific scenario, that's the kind of thing that I would really encourage you to speak to your ARENA contacts about. And we can talk about how we can kind of create a flexible pathway to enable you to be able to go to market to raise those additional funds if that's required. But ideally, we want to see the plan, know who it is you're going to be approaching, and the materiality of those requests as well.
Yep. And perhaps related to that, there's a question come through: is there a time frame on how quickly a project must be undertaken once funding is awarded? So that does naturally link to the question around the co-funding, and we're fully aware of that chicken and egg style situation. I think the general expectation is, if the key unlock for ARENA funding, it's then expected that upon approval or execution of the funding agreement, the project will start shortly after that. However, understand that it all happens on a bit of a case-by-case basis, and we just encourage you to reach out to ARENA to kind of understand that timeline a little bit better, and then naturally any timeline risk that is associated with that as well. Additional question: focus seems to be mainstream metals. Please clarify treatment of rare earth related initiatives.
I can jump into that one. So there's actually a few on kind of critical minerals, rare earths, lithium, stuff like that. So this program specifically focused on iron ore, steel, and aluminium. We do have a separate program called the Advancing Renewables program, where we have a critical energy minerals priority, and Jody mentioned that in one of the prior questions. But under that, we can consider low emissions processing of a specific subset of critical minerals. So I suggest you have a look at those Advancing Renewables program guidelines and also the critical energy minerals focus. And if you do have a project you think is aligned, feel free to reach out to ARENA either via our website or via one of the inboxes which are on our website.
Right. Thanks, Arnie. Perhaps, Lauren, what is your interpretation of TRL3? I see slightly different interpretations by different funding schemes and organizations.
Yeah, so we at ARENA, we use the Department of Energy, the US Department of Energy's TRL scale. So that's kind of where we ground most of our definitions in. Now, we recognize that there can be a lot of grey in terms of TRL, particularly when you're combining various technologies. But typically, we expect at TRL3, you would have validated your results conceptually. You'd be kind of on that pathway to creating a prototype. So we're sort of trying to make sure that we're able to capture some early prototyping within that. But again, it's not necessarily clear cut black and white. But if you do want further information in terms of our definitions, we use the US DOE TRL scale.
Great, thanks, Lauren. I will just note that some specific questions coming through and might be hard to answer in this style of forum. So if there is any question that we don't get to answer in the session today, feel free to just reach out through our funding advice program. We can have the detailed discussion to address that. One question that has come through is around, in the presentation, it was mentioned that projects are eligible from feasibility to deployment, but then in later slides stated as from FEED to deployment, clarifying whether pre-FEED would be qualifying for funding. So first of all, apologies for any confusion, but I'll pass to one of the members of the team to address that question.
Yeah, I can jump in. So I think all studies are typically fundable, with the exception of like very early stage. So things like option analysis or opportunity assessments or concept studies, when we wouldn't fund those. But a feasibility or a pre-FEED or a FEED could be eligible. We just want to see like that pathway towards demonstration or commercialization to really give it more merit.
Thanks, Jody. Question, can a project be funded by ARENA and the state government without cash contributions from the applicant institution or industry partner?
Yes, I'll take that one. I mean, it's in short, in theory, yes. I mean, I guess we wouldn't necessarily want to speak to the specifics of any alternative state-based program. So that's something that we would say we would just provide you with specific advice on a case-by-case basis. Where we do, there are instances where the majority of the contribution comes in kind, and we think that that's appropriate. So there are certain activities where, for example, it may be that they are sort of desktop-based work, and for whatever reason, there's a high level of in-kind. But in all instances, we would look on that on a case-by-case basis. So it's not to say that you would be ineligible to apply, but we would certainly apply a merit-based consideration as to the value for money that project is offering. So it's not to say that you can't apply. To say whether or not something would be funded is hard to say in this forum without seeing the particulars.
Sorry. There's a question. For a startup scaling, it's rare to have revenue, especially in materials and metals. So I think this probably speaks to my discussion around the merit B and the capability and capacity or any financial contributions. While we understand that startups naturally it might be pre-revenue in nature, that's then maybe we'd be looking to understand what kind of capital raising or seed investment and overall funding backing that the applicant has that gives us confidence that, let's say, in a 50-50 split, they are able to fund that 50 cash contribution, but then equally that they have the appropriate resources and skills required to execute on the project itself. Arnie, perhaps a question for you. Does the green iron needs to be a precursor to steel, or the green alumina a precursor to aluminium?
Yeah, so I think the answer to that would be yes. So we'd expect the green iron, the end use cases for steel production, and similar for the alumina, which is being produced by a project.
Awesome. Thank you.
And then maybe just to add to that, if there's cases where that's not the case, feel free to reach out to the team. Maybe it could fit under one of our other programs. But yeah, happy to chat through what that looks like.
Yeah, so we are getting some very specific questions coming through, and I think really the nature of them is this specific project, technology, process eligible or able to be funded through the Future Made in Australia Innovation Fund. And I think it's really important to note that this isn't the only area where we have low emissions metals priorities. So we are able to fund certain things through the our Advanced Renewables program. But again, do reach out to get that specific advice. Also important to note that we do have some strict requirements under the ARENA Act in terms of our mandate. And so, as I said, the focus of this program is really around enabling that transition to net zero. And so we do have requirements under our mandate in terms of the types of technologies that we can fund, being renewable energy technologies, low emissions, which we kind of capture a lot of these low emissions pathways through electrification and energy efficiency technologies. So if we've got technologies that are very reliant on sort of certain fossil fuels, then there can be a number of restrictions there.
Yeah, thanks, Lauren. I think it's a really good point. Just seeing if there's any, knowing we are getting close to time, if there's any other final questions, noting that, yeah, as we said, many of those more specific ones might be better off to take to a offline forum. One more question. Would enabling technologies be considered, for example, production of acids or chemicals used in the production of green metals? Arnie, I see you've gone off mute.
Yeah, I can answer that one. So I would say that probably that would be ineligible producing the acids or chemicals for the project. The project can be an off-taker from the entity producing those feedstocks, but we wouldn't consider the production of those feedstocks specifically as a good fit in itself for the program.
Yeah, it's a really good delineation. Thank you.
There's one more that's come in, just a clarification on the last response. If the project seeks to produce green iron domestically for export, is it then a requirement that domestic steel production also takes place? So no, that's not a requirement. I think we understood the other question to be that would the iron be used in steel making, whether that's domestic or offshore, doesn't matter.
Thanks, Jody. Yeah, it's good. It's a good call out.
So we are getting close to the end of time. We do have a question that's come in around contacting ARENA. So as we said, so if you go through our website, it's on the funding landing page. You will see a link to a funding advice form. That's the form that we're talking about. So you can click on that link. We do ask that you provide some information about your proposal or your concept that you're seeking funding for. You can also use that if you do have a more general inquiry in order to get some advice. But if you fill in that form, that will then, if you signify the connection to the metals portfolio, that will make sure that you're getting connected to the right team here at ARENA in order to get the advice that you need. So that's really the best way to get in touch. Obviously, with us having run these sessions and having just opened the program, we do have a very high volume of queries coming through at the moment. So we do ask that you be patient. We do try to consider each query as it comes through in significant amount of depth so that we can provide you the appropriate advice as needed. So we will try to get back to those queries as quickly as we can, but if it may take a couple of weeks or longer sometimes, depending on the nature of the query and the volume that we have coming through at any given time. So just ask a little bit of patience and we'll look to respond as best we can. Also noting that we will be updating the FAQ document on our website to reflect the questions that we've answered here today. If there were any questions that we felt we weren't able to answer in this session, we'll look to see if we can get some responses to you. But as I said, the best part, if you've got a very specific question relating to your project, is to get in touch with the team. So at that point, what we might do is we'll start to wrap up and close the session for today. So we wanted to thank you everyone for joining us to this point and participating. We're very excited. This is the largest investment in the metal space we have made here at ARENA. So we're very excited to see what comes next. If you do require anything, as I said, reach out through the form. Thank you so much for your time and your patience, and good luck.